Good evening, Dom, and everyone in the community. I've been thinking a lot about sharing my story, as it happened not long ago. In fact, I don't think it's a bad idea to do so, as long as it's done anonymously because, unfortunately, I am the protagonist of this story. I apologize in advance, as it's a bit of a long story. I'm 18 years old and live in a little-known village in the state of Mexico, near the border with Hidalgo. I would like to add that although I am aware of my physical appearance, I don't like to talk much about it, and I never cared what people thought of me. Actually, it bothers me a little. Some people, especially friends and family, always said I was very pretty, but above all that I had a big heart. I mention this because I think it will be relevant to the course of the story. I've always been very sociable. I had many friends, and when I started high school, that didn't change. I became quite well known for being very kind and always involved in activities. I truly made a point of being friends with everyone. Even the teachers had a great impression of me. Unfortunately, the day came when I would make a mistake, and that slip-up led me to the story I'm about to tell now. In the last semester of high school, a new student arrived. Since I was always a friendly person, my group of friends and I welcomed her with open arms into our class and even invited her to have lunch with us during the break. She accepted, but you could see the discomfort on her face. I thought maybe we had been a little too forward or bold, but I didn't pay much attention as our intentions were genuinely good. The day went on as usual, and when break time came, my friends and I met in our usual spot, a tree that provided great shade, where we had set up to eat in the lower part of the courts. We waited for the new girl to show up, but she never came. We thought maybe she hadn't liked us much, so we just went on with our routine. Days went by, and this girl, whom I will call Sandra, continued to keep to herself. I noticed that when group or pair assignments were given, she didn't hand anything in because she had no one to team up with. So, for the next assignment, which was also in pairs, I decided to break away from my friends and do the project with her whether she liked it or not. She wasn't very happy, but she ended up agreeing, as the teacher made it clear that if she didn't do it, she would fail the subject. Something no one wanted, especially at the end of high school. We started organizing the project. She couldn't come to my house, saying she lived far away in a neighboring village. So I suggested going to her house, but she refused, saying her parents didn't like visitors and that it was better if I didn't go. She suggested we do the work in a library near her house, and since I had a car, I thought that was the best option. As we progressed with the project, she started feeling more comfortable with me. She told me about her family, mentioned she had a younger brother, that her parents were very strict with her, and made a comment that, at the time, didn't catch my attention much. When we have ceremonies, everything gets chaotic, which is why I don't like inviting anyone to my house. Over time, Sandra and I began spending more time together, and without realizing it, I was drifting away from my group of friends. Even though we had finished our project, we continued meeting at the same library, and she always brought me cookies. She said she made them with her own hands, with lots of love, and that there was a special ingredient that made them so tasty. Indeed, the taste of those cookies is something I'll never forget. After a while, I started noticing my hair falling out in the shower. At first, I didn't worry much, since we were in the exam period, and I thought it was due to stress. Besides, I was getting closer to Sandra. Instead of meeting at the library, we started meeting in a small park near her house. It got to the point where I was only eating the cookies she brought me. It wasn't just 2 or 3 anymore. She always showed up with a box full of them for me. I started noticing other changes. My hair was falling out more, I lost a lot of weight, my face looked tired, and I constantly felt exhausted. Additionally, I had no appetite for anything other than those cookies. They were the only thing I craved, but even so, I kept attributing these symptoms to school stress and didn't give it much importance. About a month and a half went by, and I was still in the same state, unaware of what was happening. Those friends I had and the popularity I enjoyed in high school were disappearing. The only person I was in contact with was Sandra. She always told me that I didn't need anyone else, that she would be by my side no matter what, and in a way she was right. In the end, she was all I had. As the months went by, things at home started getting worse. My little dog, who had been with me since childhood, got sick and died. Shortly after, my hamster also died. I started having trouble sleeping because I felt like something or someone was watching me at night. Between this and the stress from school, my appearance deteriorated even more. On graduation day, Sandra told me she was ready to invite me to her house. She said she would introduce me to her family and had everything prepared for my initiation to be special. In my naivety, I thought she meant I would be meeting her family, but I was completely wrong. Sandra asked me to wear a red dress just like the one she would wear because she wanted us to look very pretty that day, and I agreed. I wanted everything to go as she had planned. At that moment, the only thing that mattered to me was seeing Sandra happy. It was the first time she invited a friend to her house, and she was very excited about it. She picked me up in a black Mustang with dark windows and a red stripe across the car horizontally. I was surprised because in my village, it was very rare to see a car like that, even more so since Sandra had never mentioned she had one or that she knew how to drive. When we arrived at her house, a wooden gate with carved figures opened, revealing a large courtyard and a house in the distance. We got out of the car, and upon entering, we were greeted by a woman who looked no older than 35, with a little boy about 3 or 4 years old. The woman called for her husband. "Fernando, come down, the girl has arrived with the other girl." Coming down the stairs was a man who didn't look older than 40, with an impressive and attractive physique, just like the lady. "Come in, my child," he said with a firm yet welcoming voice. "So you are the one who gives life to my Sandra," he added. I smiled awkwardly as Sandra responded, "Yes, Daddy," though she was prettier when I first met her. It was then that I realized I had never really paid attention to Sandra's appearance before. When we first met, she wasn't exactly attractive, but now she was stunning. I started to question what I was doing there when Sandra's mother commented that they were just waiting for nightfall to finish what Sandra had started. An inexplicable fear took hold of me. I didn't know what they were planning, but hearing those words terrified me. I tried to tell Sandra that I needed to leave, but she refused. She said she knew I had permission to stay the night and that I shouldn't be afraid because if I were, the ceremony wouldn't work. Her words froze me. I tried to grab my phone to call my parents, but then I realized I didn't know where it was or who had taken it. As the evening darkened, I began to feel a huge hunger, but on the table there were only the cookies, the same ones Sandra always gave me. Shortly after, her mother came down the stairs, dressed in a red satin robe. Behind her came her husband, Sandra, and the little boy, all dressed in red as well. The boy sat next to me and wouldn't stop staring at me. It was very strange, but despite being just a child, his gaze was what unsettled me the most. I just wanted to flee, to get out of there as fast as I could, but I knew I couldn't, with the 4 of them watching me. I asked Sandra to bring me a glass of water because I was very thirsty, and while she went to the kitchen, I took the opportunity and ran with all my strength. I don't know how I made it to the gate, but I threw myself against it with all my weight to open it, and I felt Sandra's parents running after me. Luckily, I managed to escape. I ran to a small store and told the people there that someone was trying to rob me and that I needed to use the phone. I called my parents, who came to pick me up. I didn't tell them what really happened. I just said that Sandra and I had an argument and that I didn't want to stay at her house anymore. To this day, I don't know what those people wanted to do to me or what would have happened if they had caught me, but I felt weaker and weaker. My parents noticed but didn't know how to help me either. Sometime later, in a conversation with my godmother, she told them that what was happening to me was the result of envy. Someone wanted what I had, and the only way they found to get it was by taking it from me, placing it on me like a mask. She recommended that we see a friend of hers who specialized in removing this kind of work. We went in early August. As soon as the man did a cleansing on me, he gave me some very strange herbs to drink, with an extremely strong smell. I forced myself to drink, and shortly after I started vomiting a kind of ball of hair. He examined it and said it was human hair from someone close to me who was very envious. He affirmed that the beauty I had lost would return and that the people who did this were very powerful, but that now I was safe, that I had freed myself from them, and with the other cleansings he gave me, I would be protected. Since that day, I've been feeling much better. Recently, I started university and made new friends, but now I'm much more selective and try not to trust people too much. I want to end by telling you all that envy is real, and there's no such thing as good envy. All envy is bad. Be careful with the friendships you make, with what you eat, and with what you receive from people you barely know. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive the next stories. Your presence is important and your support is essential. Well, let's continue. Hello, Dom. I hope you're doing well. My name is Anna, and I'd like to share a story about something that happened to me many years ago when I was 10. I was part of a small group of friends. There were 4 of us in total. Like many kids, we were a bit rowdy, but nothing out of the ordinary. One day, our curiosity led us to experiment with something that, looking back, I wish we had never touched: a Ouija board. The cousin of one of my friends, Arthur, lent us his, and we decided to have a sleepover at his house to play with it. Being young and clueless, we had no idea what we were about to stir up. At first, everything seemed harmless. We asked silly questions and laughed at the answers, thinking we were the ones moving the pointer. But as time went on, the answers started to become more personal, revealing things only we ourselves would know. The atmosphere subtly began to change, but you could feel that something was off. One of my friends still didn't believe what was happening. Between laughs, he began to provoke the entity, demanding it to show itself. We asked him to calm down, not so much because we were scared, but because Arthur's mother was sleeping, and we didn't want to wake her up and get in trouble for playing with that board. Suddenly, the glass table we were playing on cracked out of nowhere. We just saw a crack form and slowly spread across the entire surface. We laughed at the coincidence, trying to shake off the fear, but then we heard a loud noise upstairs, like a door being slammed shut. We thought it was Arthur's mother waking up, and I felt a brief sense of relief hearing her footsteps. But that relief vanished when we saw her running down the stairs, screaming in a way we had never heard before. She started cursing at Arthur aggressively, but there was something very strange about her voice. It was as if a child and a man were speaking at the same time. I said goodbye, but no one heard me. Something told me I shouldn't stay in that house. I went home and went to bed without dinner, so terrified and disturbed that I couldn't even think about eating. Later, my parents woke me up. They wanted to know what had happened at Arthur's house. I told them I didn't know. They told me that something very serious had occurred after I left, that the neighbors heard screams and when they approached, found Arthur's mother out of her mind, choking Damien. They managed to separate her from him with the help of several people, and soon the police and ambulances arrived. They said Damien was in critical condition at the hospital. Of course, that was the last time we got together as a group of friends. Arthur never spoke to us again. His mother was taken away, but not to prison, rather to a hospital, or so they say. Arthur went to live with his grandparents since his father had passed away a long time ago. As for my other friend, I never heard from him again, only that he moved to Tamaulipas. And Damian, unfortunately, suffered very severe consequences. From what I've heard, he went several minutes without breathing and suffered brain damage that left him unable to move or speak. It still hurts to think about it. On my end, although at first it didn't seem like anything had happened, my parents say that after that day I started sleepwalking and talking in my sleep. My behavior also changed. I became aggressive, even violent, and no one knew why. In the end, someone they sought help from said I had something attached to me, a mischievous entity not entirely evil. They performed several cleansings and used holy water and oil to protect me. They also hung St. Benedict's keys around the house, but the strangest thing is that even though they were left hanging, they always rusted. The fear itself, I can't say for sure that all of this happened because of the game, but I feel that if I played it again, I would find out the truth, and that's something I don't want. Hello, good evening. My name is Eduardo, and I've been a bus driver for Los Colores Company since the beginning of the millennium. I've been listening to your stories, and today I want to share something that happened to me which still makes me reflect to this day. I'm not very good at writing stories, but I'll do my best. A few years ago, I was on the Coatzacoalcos-Querétaro route, where I often drive through roads covered in fog at night. Personally, I prefer driving at night because there's usually little traffic. That day, I left as usual, crossed Veracruz, and as I headed up towards Jalapa, I encountered very dense fog, not knowing what lay ahead. After leaving Jalapa toward the state highway to Puebla, I followed my usual route, picking up passengers and loading the bus as I normally do. However, something caught my attention. An elderly woman, who seemed quite unusual with a large frame and dressed in traditional ranch clothing. I greeted her and invited her to board. She bought a ticket, we loaded her luggage, and after everyone had boarded, I continued the journey as usual. As I climbed the dangerous curves, I noticed I had to go very slowly because, as I expected, the fog was extremely dense that night. I drove with great caution. What really struck me as odd was that since I left Jalapa, I had begun to feel an unusual fatigue. This wasn't normal for me, as I'm used to long hours of driving, and sleepiness usually only kicks in when I'm nearing Querétaro. I kept driving, but soon I felt a chill. It was as if someone was sitting beside me, which made me shudder, but no matter how much I looked, I saw nothing and no one. That's when I remembered the mysterious older woman. This thought scared me again. I continued my journey, feeling frightened. When I arrived in Querétaro and the passengers started to get off, the last to leave was, in fact, that mysterious woman. As I handed her her luggage, she said to me, "You got scared, didn't you?" This surprised me, and I asked, "When, ma'am?" She replied, "Early yesterday morning he tried to get on, but I came with you. Don't worry, I left something to protect you. The next time you see that black fog, just say out loud, 'You're not coming in here.'" Since then, I had never told anyone about this, until recently, when a photo of a ghost that got on with a truck driver in that same area went viral. I don't know how that woman knew what happened, but I've never seen anything like that again. What I do know is that when I travel at night, sometimes I feel as if someone is accompanying me in the cabin, but I no longer feel afraid. On some trips, I sense this presence. On others, I don't. She only shows up when I feel like I'm in danger. I have more stories, but I hope you liked this one, even though I know it's hard to believe. That's how things happened. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave your like, it's very important. Well, let's continue. The first strange dream I had, when I thought I was just going through sleep paralysis, happened in my childhood. I remember it clearly because, at that time, before anyone explained what was behind it and told me there was no reason to be scared, those episodes seemed simply terrifying. That particular night, I fell asleep to the sound of my parents arguing. Although they had never resorted to physical aggression, I remember that days before my mother had thrown one of my toys at my father during a heated argument. She held the object with increasing force as the argument escalated. It was a small pony. My father knew exactly where to strike with his cruel words, always finding the right spot to hurt and destabilize her. He would say that she had given up everything to be a mother and housewife, and that she couldn't even do that properly, that she would never be enough. You can imagine the kind of thing. The next image I have is of him ducking as my toy flew over his head. Then, I saw my mother's eyes, filled with a fierce anger I had never seen before. I remember that moment of silence, where neither of them dared to say anything. And although I was in shock and terrified, I decided to do something. I started crying and screaming. I didn't really feel like crying, but it was the only thing that came to mind to divert attention and prevent the fight from worsening, and at that moment it worked. It worked. But I knew I couldn't do that every time I felt afraid that the situation would cross a dangerous line. I was tired. I felt increasingly exhausted. My brother had already left home, moved to live with our uncles in another city, and to study at the university. I am absolutely certain, though he never admitted it, that he chose to study a course that didn't exist in our city just so he could leave. Here in Mexico, unlike in the United States and other countries, It's common for children to live with their parents while they study, but he decided he wouldn't do that. And he managed to escape, leaving behind this burden which was now mine. I, a child, worried every day. I, who didn't deserve to carry this weight. I got tired of hearing repeatedly that they were together only because of me, only because they loved me. It took me a long time to forgive myself for that, because deep down, I believed that all the unhappiness they showed every day was my fault. I felt that it was my responsibility that they were still together. And now, in that moment too, I felt it was my duty to ensure they didn't kill each other. One night, after an entire day of arguments that had started early in the morning, I simply decided to go to bed and try to sleep. But their voices, arguing in the living room, echoed through the rooms, and then the fight moved to their bedroom. At some point, I heard my mother leave to sleep in the living room, but soon after, my father went after her because they weren't done yet. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the house, going from the living room to the bedroom, passing right in front of my door. Then, I heard the back and forth movement again, several times. Finally, I opened my eyes, but something was wrong. I couldn't move. That's when I noticed that my bedroom door was open, and I saw it passing from side to side while my parents argued, completely oblivious to its presence. It was like a stain of burnt red, almost black. I could barely see through my tear-filled eyes. I tried to concentrate, to focus on that figure. The thing passed again, and this time it stopped right in front of my door. It realized that I had seen it. It stood there, staring at me. As the seconds passed, that figure began to take shape. I don't know if it was changing or if my eyes and brain were trying to make sense of what I was seeing, creating an image I could recognize. What was outside my room was red with horns like the devil from the lottery game. It was holding its own tail in its hands and wouldn't stop staring at me. It wasn't smiling, but I felt a mocking air coming from it. I didn't need to see it smile to feel that. It continued walking back and forth in the hallway over and over, while I remained there, motionless, crying out of fear, crying out of anger. The dreams became more sporadic, but looking back, I realized that many of them happened at very important moments in my life, both good and bad, especially during the bad times. The few deaths that occurred in my family were terrible, and all of them were preceded by one of those dreams. I was 17 when I woke up again at 3 in the morning. I didn't need to look at the clock. I just knew. It was always like that. My room was completely dark, though I always left a small lamp on since the dark scared me. But somehow, the light had been turned off. The switch was stiff, and there was no way it could have happened due to an electrical problem. I woke up, but I couldn't fully open my eyes or move. Slowly, I began to wake up, quote unquote, because I started forgetting the dream I had been having. As my consciousness returned, I tried to look around the room, but my body remained paralyzed, completely rigid. That's when I saw something in the corner of the room, sitting. There was no chair there, but whatever it was, it seemed to be sitting on one. The room was very dark, but my eyes began to adjust, and little by little I started recognizing a shape. It looked like a woman sitting, wearing a long skirt, made up of several layers of fabric. Her hands rested on her knees, and she wore frilled sleeves. The most terrifying thing, she was smiling. I tried not to look, tried to sleep, but the fear I felt was overwhelming. Her presence deeply disturbed me, though I wanted to believe it was just a creation of my imagination. I opened my eyes again. Now she was looking at me. Her head remained facing forward, but her eyes, completely distorted, were looking at me sideways, still with that horrible smile on her face. Every time I opened my eyes, there she was. I stayed like that for an hour until I heard my father get up, much earlier than usual. He took a shower, got dressed, and left the house. He didn't come to say goodbye to me. I only heard the sound of the car being backed out with some difficulty in the early morning, and he drove off. That afternoon, there was an event at my father's work, right after lunch. It was some kind of celebration on the terrace of the building where his offices were. My father was there, interacting with everyone as usual. He chatted, laughed, made jokes with his colleagues. Then suddenly, he placed his drink on the table, wiped his hands with a napkin, turned, and walked towards the edge of the terrace. We received the call an hour later. The strangest thing is that in the previous days, there were no arguments at home, he didn't scold me, and nothing, absolutely nothing, indicated that something like this was going to happen. Not for a second did I think my father would do something to hurt himself. In the past few weeks, it even seemed like there was a certain peace at home. Later, my mother said that maybe that was just the calm before the storm. I had another one of those dreams the next night, a night that changed my life forever. I was still living with my mother, but she wasn't home. She was out celebrating, if I'm not mistaken, the 25th wedding anniversary of her best friend. She had insisted that I go, saying it would be good for me, that Mariana, her friend's daughter, wanted to reconnect with me, for us to be friends again like when we were kids. But honestly, snobby people give me immense laziness, so I decided to stay home. At 3 in the morning, I opened my eyes. I heard my mother arriving. She walked to my bedroom door and opened it. I pretended to be asleep to avoid conversation, but I heard her come in and strangely crawl under my bed. "Here I am, huh? Down here. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Don't look at me, please." The voice was my mother's, but at the same time it sounded different. I had never felt anything like that before. I was terrified, but the way she said that made me feel like I needed to see, needed to look under the bed. There was something they were trying to hide from me, something I had to see. Then I realized that suddenly I could move. I only managed to lean out of bed a little, but I didn't have the courage to get down. I ended up falling asleep, as always happened in these situations, without ever having the courage to run away. The next morning we received a call. It was my brother's girlfriend. She told us that in the early hours of the morning they were at a party. He went out to smoke, and then a black car with darkened windows approached. Neither she nor anyone nearby could see who was inside. The car stopped next to him. Someone rolled down the window and said something. My brother looked at the person, then looked at his girlfriend, waved his hand and got into the car. That was the last time she saw him. She had been without news of him for hours, and so she decided to call us to see if we had any idea who it could have been. But we didn't know anything. We had no idea who had come to get him. It had been years since we'd seen him, and we never saw him again. No one ever heard anything more, neither about him nor about that car. It was as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth. And maybe I don't talk about it with the pain I should, I know, but the age difference between us meant that we were never very close. And after he left town, he came back very few times. He distanced himself, especially after my father's death. I always had the feeling that he blamed us, as if he believed that it had been our fault.